Welcome to Let's Talk Racism, a series of shows produced by university students all over the world to create a dialogue around racism and its roots in our respective countries. I'm Emily Hartley from Leeds Trinity University in the UK, along with Kudzi Chinambiri.
I'm Sunny Sun with Leonie Xue from Hong Kong Baptist University in Hong Kong. This episode will focus especially on current events that came out of recent worldwide protests from the Black Lives Matter movement, calls to defund the police, and much more.
I'm Courtney Dorrington.
And I'm Amber Cape, and we're from Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. On May 26th, a 46-year-old Black man, George Floyd, was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after being detained by police officers. One officer pushed his knee onto Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as Floyd cried out that he couldn't breathe.
That event, along with the killing of a young Black woman, Breonna Taylor, set off massive protests that started in the US and went around the world.
All through the summer and fall, systemic racism was a topic of conversation in the media and by political and social activist groups.
Our first story was produced by Jaleese Graham, a student from CSU Fresno in California, and she joins us now.
Hello all. I spoke with activists, artists, academics, and faith leaders here in California about the anxiety of living, surviving, and thriving amid racism and violence while the future of the Black community seems so uncertain.
3 words that describe how I'm feeling right now: mad,
anxiety,
scared, angry, helpless,
rage,
pissed off,
fatigue,
enraged.
African-American child named Tamir Rice was fatally shot by police holding what turned out to be a pellet gun.
Tonight after an unarmed African-American teenager was shot and killed by police in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson, Missouri.
National headlines. The state of Louisiana will not charge 2 police officers in the shooting death of Bolton Sterling, a father of 5.
The 7th night of protests in Louisville, Kentucky, as thousands demanded justice for George Floyd and for 2 Black Louisville residents killed by police, including Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old African-American woman shot to death by police in her own apartment in March. Taylor was an emergency.
More times than not, I just find myself enraged at what's going on. The thing about this situation is it's forced some things to the surface, some conversations, some awareness. It's just literally forced them to the surface. And you can't help but to process them in some capacity.
My way of coping with it was, let me push everything away and let me unplug from everything. Let me go to the mountains. Let me just get away from everybody. But when that didn't work, I had to kind of confront what was happening. And I personally don't see an end in sight. One reason why I'm mad is because we are in 2020, and yet I have to experience, my son has to experience, my relatives have to experience things that my grandparents went through, my great-great-grandparents went through. And I didn't think we would be in these times in 2020.
My concern is that I'll tap into that rage that I talked about earlier. And I think a lot of us spend our time just trying to keep that person at bay.
I fear that my son has to walk out in this world, every day with a target on his back. And he hasn't done anything. I'm mostly afraid that one day these stories aren't going to be just in the news, that it's going to be in my house, that it's going to be a part of my story, not just a news story.
I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress?
The boy in the video is my 7-year-old son. Watching him consume all the different news stories really inspired me. For a while, it seemed like America's news coverage was consumed with Black Lives Matter movement and victims of police brutality.
You know, Julie's, we have the same issue here in Toronto. News outlets fail to realize how impressionable young Blacks are and how they develop a negative self-concept by constantly paying attention to these negative depictions in the media.
Yeah, and after as we mentioned, the protests after George Floyd's killing took place all over the world and including here in Canada.
We're about to meet a young Black woman who grew up in a white family in a town near Toronto. Zoe Gilbert had very little exposure to the Black Lives Matter movement or education about racial issues growing up.
But when she heard about the protests going on in her town, she decided to attend with her family and friends.
It was my first time ever attending a protest. Even though I am a Black person, I never feel like I was mainly active, like I wasn't doing anything actively, I feel like, in my community to help people. And I feel like this was the perfect time to finally actually do something and be a part of it. So I obviously did research myself because I grew up in a white family. So I myself don't even know that much about racism.
We will hear from Zoe again at the end of the show when she talks about how attending the protests made her think about her own experience and the need to speak out against the racist comments.
People of all races and backgrounds attended the protests. One of them is Madeline Hanukkah, a young white woman who marched in a protest just outside of Toronto.
I felt like if I'm going to preach that everyone should support anti-racist causes, then it's hypocritical for me not to go, even despite the pandemic. So I went to show my support and be an extra body, an extra voice. I think just as a white person, I can read articles, but seeing someone's raw emotion and talking about those issues and how much it affects them, it was so moving and sad but inspiring at the same time. It was just a lot emotionally in one day. The first time I ever heard of Black Lives Matter, I even had that first thought of what do you mean? Every life matters. But then I think after reading more about it, everything was just it made sense. And I think that has a lot to do with just social media. You hear things, you read things. I was getting my nails done, and I used to have a Black Lives Matter sign in the window of my car because I had brought it to the protest and I was like, I'm not gonna throw it out. So I put it in my car and I parked outside the salon, and then I guess I hadn't noticed, but she had seen the sign in my car, and she was like, oh, did you go to one of those protests? And I was like, yeah, I did. And she said, well, how long ago? And I was like, 3 weeks or so. But then as the appointment continued, it was harped on for the entire time. And at one point she said, so why did you even go to that protest anyway? And I said, I want to show my support, want to be an extra body, an extra voice. I believe in what they stand for. And her response was, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And every life matters. We're not the States, which hello, you're delusional. And yeah, it was so awkward because, one, it's just unprofessional. Two, how can you even sit there and deny what's going on in our country and around the world? I think that this is an issue that has just been swept under the rug for way too long. And I want to be able to help amplify voices of people of color if I can. And I think that I'm in a position of privilege that it would be like shameful not to take advantage of that.
Maddie told me that experiencing the pushback that she did only makes her more determined to contribute to the movement and educate herself and others on issues of systemic racism.
Yeah, I just thought it was really shocking in that video how she couldn't even go to the nail salon with without someone commenting.
The fear of backlash from attending protest is real for a lot of participants, but I think it's a sign of real change happening. How about you, Sunny?
Yeah, I learned about Black Lives Matter protests from a cultural perspective. During the internship in Billboard Radio China, I saw lots of music works reflecting their complaints of police abuse, such as Lily Baby's The Bigger Picture.
Yeah, just circling back to the protests, I think that many people have a common misconception that the Black Lives Matter protests are just for Black people or people of color, but really the protest is for anyone that wants to be an ally. And personally, I think that that should be just about everybody.
Yeah, everyone should get involved. So being next to the US, we get a lot of same coverage as the US. And for almost a month after, it felt like there were protests being covered all around the world.
Yeah, even here in England, I think from seeing a lot of coverage in America, it gained momentum within the UK. And even like the tearing down of the monuments that we saw in America, there was talks of doing that in England as well.
Julius, what do you think about the rest of the world and how they reacted to the protests?
I think for myself and a lot of Black Americans here, it was really inspiring. It was really cool to see that we have allies everywhere and that there's hope for change.
Yeah, I think so too. I saw news stories even talking about the risk of the virus spreading because people were at these protests, and it was almost downplaying the meaning of why people were protesting and almost blaming protesters for the spread of the virus. But thank you so much, Julius, and we'll see you again at the end of the show.
In the UK, the Black Lives Matter movement gained a lot of momentum from the protests in America. There was a lot of attention to the pulling down of a statue of Edward Colston, who was a slave owner.
All Black Lives UK is a youth-led activist organisation inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement. Tyreek Morris is the founder of this group, and he is based in Manchester.
In order for change to happen, you need to be the change in which you want to see. And my mum's always said to me, I know she didn't directly say this, but she's always said this to me, if not you, then who? Or if not me, then who? Because I can't be sat here expecting everyone else to fight for me and I can't fight for myself. Like, that's just, personally, to me, it's really embarrassing. You're not embarrassed? Obviously, I like to stick up for other people too. And I like to give people a voice. I like to have my own voice, and I like to give people a platform to speak up on it. So if I didn't create that when I did that protest, I was doing it for the masses of people who did come, and doing it for them to, feel like they've got a space. But I wasn't really, the main person I was doing it for was for myself.
I did a longer interview with Tyreek, and it's on our website. He also talks about his upbringing in a predominantly white area and his own personal experiences with racism and how that affected him.
You are watching Let's Talk Racism, one of 5 shows produced by students at 7 universities from around the world.
All 5 of our shows can be seen on our website, as well as on YouTube and Facebook.
During the protests, lots of businesses were targeted, with vandalism, break-ins, and lootings. Other acts of violence against shop owners have come in response to the growing Black Lives Matter movement.
Sammy Cortez from CSU Fresno now joins us with a story about one business in California. Hello, Sammy.
Hello. Chanel Wapner is the only Black store owner in an entirely white-owned shopping center near where I live. Chanel's store was vandalized back in September, and the racial slurs written throughout her store had officials labeling this a hate crime. She said it was hard to be a target. Back in late September, this store looked completely different inside and out. Vandals broke into the store, stealing and destroying all of the products sold here. Writing racial slurs on the walls, floor, and doors, Chanel Wapner came to work to find that she was the victim of a hate crime.
I'm not crazy. I'm 57 years old. I know that this happens in this world, in this country, and just for it to be so blatant in my face to me It brought the temperature of the country right in my face for me.
After her business and race were attacked, Wapner received an abundance of support both online and in person.
It was more that every person that came in was giving me support, whether it was hugs, whether it was money, whether it was flowers, whether it was cards, whether it was just prayer. That was empowering to me. That's how it's supposed to be, so that just made this incident start, the power of it began to weaken for me.
While Wapner initially declined a GoFundMe fundraising effort, Clovis City Councilman Bob Whalen set up one on behalf of her store, and the page has earned over $30,000. All of which was donated back into Old Town's organizations for its local businesses. Chanel donated all the GoFundMe money back into the community because she says keeping all of the stores in Old Town alive and thriving is important to her.
I'm showing them with their supporting me, they're helping me support us. And it's not just about me, it's about all the local businesses in Clovis, Old Town Clovis. That's important to me, and I just want to make sure that we all stay here. They've been here forever. I want to be one of those who've been here forevers.
And for Wapner, that's looking very probable. Just recently, Wapner held her grand reopening for her store and was met with overwhelming support. Dozens of people in the community showed up to support her in her reopen. Lines formed in front of her store, down to the end of the street. People waited outside to support her and how far she's come to get her store back and better than before the hate crime had occurred. So this story was really hard to cover because you wouldn't think that such violent acts could take place in the area that you live. And like Wapner said, it was just really disheartening, and I felt bad, but I did want to give her power back by, letting her voice be heard and running this story in our local newscast. Was there any vandalism of Black businesses in Canada?
None that I know of being reported, specifically businesses, but there was vandalism that took place in Guelph, which is just about an hour away from Toronto, at the Black Heritage Center. And the vandalism that happened there increased just right after the Black Lives Matter movement. So that was pretty disheartening to hear about.
Yeah, I heard in September that there was a Black-owned food truck in Manchester that was burned down, and it was seen as a racially motivated attack just off the bat of the Black Lives Matter protests that happened in Manchester. And a few weeks before his truck was burnt down, his van was actually stolen. But even though it was a disheartening situation, many people online saw that and decided to donate to this guy, and he was able to raise enough money to set up a new truck and continue his business.
Yeah, here in Hong Kong last year in October, during the mass protests in Hong Kong, the gate of Kowloon Mosque was soaked in the blue solution by the police water cannon. It was seen as an offense against Islam religion, but the police later said its water cannon truck had accidentally sprayed blue dye water at the entrance.
Our next story isn't about vandalism, but it is about another form of discrimination that is insensitive and thoughtless.
Tracy Ekopit and Sini Nguyen from the University of Johannesburg in South Africa join us now.
In South Africa recently, a chain store circulated an ad that was highly offensive. The protests that broke out afterwards became violent.
That basically says that black people's hair is rubbish. We'll never accept that. That is what colonialism and apartheid did for centuries. That is what slavery did to our people. We will never ever allow that. While protesting here, Veldsmans and cliques must go to hell with their lawyers, with everything. Yes. We have responded with just one sentence to say that go to hell, and that is what we are repeating and we're unapologetic about it.
That's right.
Busisiwe Nkosi is the coordinator of the Anti-Racism Network South Africa. And during the protests against cliques in Tresemme, Ms. Nkosi was part of a group of people who held meetings with two business entities.
With regards to the clicks ad, I just want to know if you would like to talk us through what happened behind the scenes when you met with both Tresemme and clicks.
For this thing to be designed by someone, to be planned by someone, to be processed by someone, for it to eventually land up on your website, it should have passed maybe 5 or 6 people. How did all these people not see how offensive this was? You know, and with clicks was like, no, they were also like shocked, and they have now pulled out from being a partner or of Tresemme products, blah, 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 you know? And then the next step was actually now understanding Tresemme and saying, okay, Tresemme, you give it to us. And at first, Tresemme tried to justify the ads in a sense of people are just being offended easily.
What are the common problems that you've noted with ads and racism?
I think the common problem would be the usage of words and visuals that are hurtful to particular race groups, especially Black people. Whereas the companies and institutions don't realize it themselves until they are called out by society. From Tresemme and with clicks, what they said is that part of the teams who created those ads had people of color in them. But I think because those people are within an institution where they've normalized some things, no one said anything, you know? No Black person from the team was offended. If they were, they said nothing about it.
Does South Africa have unique racism problems?
We are unfortunately in a free democratic country that has not changed much when it comes to race and race relations. But currently we are still carrying the baggage of the past, more especially as Black people.
What do you feel the biggest role of allies would be in terms of fighting racism in South Africa? Maybe allies who are not people of color, Black people.
For me, I think it's every single race group that needs to come together in the fight against racism. I think globally, we have seen how things like the Black Lives Matter movement has brought people together for the first time in a very long while to be fighting and to be speaking out and to be having and organizing against racism, you know? And I think if every single person in their small community can ensure that no other person is discriminated against because of the color of their skin, we would then start moving somewhere. So collaboration, and not just South African, but on a global level, is something that we should be working towards, you know? Our struggle is your struggle, and your struggle is our struggle.
Tracy and Sine, what was your initial reaction when you guys saw that?
At first, I was shocked. I couldn't believe that in 2020, that and in such a racially charged country like South Africa, such a blatantly racist ad would be circulated. I didn't understand how they could let this ad go through many different systems and still be put out for everyone to see. It also upset me because, you know, I didn't like that people still thought that way, you know, thought that Black hair is, you know, is problematic and white hair isn't.
I know when I first heard about the advert, I was very disturbed. I just could not believe that such a big company would make such a mistake. And it really took me a while to look up on YouTube and to see more of the advert. And most of the time I read about it and heard about it on the radio. And just to be honest, I tried understanding the side of cliques and Tresemme, but I just still cannot accept that so many people could not see that the ad was offensive. And then ever since then, I promised myself that I was never going to buy any natural products from cliques ever again. And in fact, I told myself that I would never buy anything from cliques ever again.
Tracy and Sydney, what effect do you think the woman we just from, Miss Colsey, had on the public during the protests?
I think that she gave a voice to the Black people. I think she helped to articulate our grievance to both Tresemme and cliques, and was able to get some form of justice because she put them through diversity training. So I think they kind of learned their lesson. So I think that had a positive effect on the public because, you know, we have more faith in them to do better in the future. But obviously there's still people who don't understand the outrage, who still think that all of this was unnecessary.
And I think that she played a very important role in understanding both sides of the story from EFF, which is the Economic Freedom Fighters, and standing on behalf of the public, and also the side of cliques and Tresemme. And she made it clear that both sides understood what racism is and to which extent freedom of speech goes. Have there been similar ads where you live?
Well, the story we just watched actually reminds me of a Dove campaign that was released a few years back. This short body wash commercial that was mainly featured on YouTube and Facebook featured a Black woman removing her shirt and subsequently transitioning to a white woman. Critics claim that this video implied that Black women needed to cleanse. So Dove responded, admitting that they had totally missed the mark in representing women of color thoughtfully.
Yeah, you know, another example of just insensitive advertising is with the Pepsi Live For Now campaign. It featured the model Kendall Jenner, and basically she left a modeling shoot to join a protest that Pepsi fabricated for the commercial, and then implied that if she would hand a cop a can of Pepsi, that it would completely end all the protests. And that was also just completely not received well by audiences, and they had to pull the ad within the next day.
Yeah, I have seen a similar advertisement in China, an advertisement for the Chinese laundry detergent Xiaobi. The video story shows a Black man transformed into a light-skinned Chinese man after using the product. After the video was uploaded to the YouTube, it was criticized by foreign media and netizens. Then it was banned.
Yeah, in the UK, I heard of the H&M coolest monkey in the jungle kind of scandal, where H&M had an advert for these new jumpers, and for the model, it was a young little Black boy, and he was wearing a jumper that says coolest monkey in the jungle. And, you know, obviously so many Black people were outraged and disgusted with how they thought it was okay to do that. And me personally, I didn't even want to shop at H&M anymore, and I really like H&M, so I was just really hurt with how they just put that out there. And it was only in 2018, and I just think for you to put out an ad that is so offensive, you must not have any Black people working in your teams. You must not have anyone who, no Black person would see that and want to approve that. So I just think they have a lot of work to do in their company as a whole. And yeah.
Another one in England, actually, there was an advert for a supermarket featuring an all-Black family, and this received a lot of backlash from white people saying that now this supermarket's only representing Black people, even though we have another supermarket and the family there is actually a family of carrots. So it's a completely ridiculous concept.
We're just going to say goodbye to Sine and Tracy now. Thank you so much for joining us from the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, and we will see you again at the end of the show.
Stereotypes about Black people happen in more than just advertising. In the Netherlands, there's a Christmas tradition called Black Pete.
One of our partners for Let's Talk Racism is BUAS University in the Netherlands. First, we'll see a description of the annual Christmas tradition, and then we'll meet Katrina, a 28-year-old British woman living in the Netherlands. She talks about how racism is integrated into Dutch culture historically and today.
Sinterklaas is an annual Dutch children's celebration based on the legend of Saint Nicholas. The story dates back to the 13th century and has a rich, evolving history. Today, kids are told that in November, Sinterklaas arrives from Spain on a steamboat with his servants, the Black Peets. In the past, the Black Peets were responsible for taking the naughty kids in a sack back to Spain to discipline them. Today's Peets are friendlier and more comical. Kids are told that the Peets are black because they slide down chimneys at night to bring them gifts. While this will make complete sense to a child, the big black afro, golden hoop earrings, and exaggerated red lipstick are a lot harder to explain. The general perception of the Netherlands as a progressive and diverse country often makes foreigners wonder, does this shameless national use of blackface still exist today? Well, the reality is that even last year during parades and performances, the Peets are almost always white people in blackface. The inferior position of the Black Peet to the white Sinterklaas further highlights the century-old connotations of slavery, racism, and discrimination. Black Peet has over the years gained global exposure and caused controversy and outrage both internationally and within the Netherlands. Growing pressure of projects like Black Peet is Racism and Black Lives Matter have led to a national decrease in the full blackface costume. Arguments against these groups protest that Black Peet is a treasured Dutch tradition and urge others not to ruin the magic of the celebration for the children. Even today, this character continues to divide the Dutch society.
And so I was really, again, shocked that this was even a thing that people still do in this way. So essentially, Sinterklaas is Santa Claus, and he gives the presents to children at Christmas. We all know this story. He has helpers, and these helpers are, let's say they've got black skin, they've got curly hair, and they wear hooped earrings, and they have big red lips, and they look like that because they came down the chimney.
What encounters have you had with Zwarte Piet, and how did these make you feel?
Last year, during that period, I was up in the north of Holland, and I was seeing in all of these shop windows these little pictures of these Black Peets in the window, and it didn't dawn on me at first. I was like, why are all these little black faces in the window? It just was weird. And then the person I was with explained, okay, that it's that time of year, okay. But the strangest thing was actually to see an adult man who was clearly white, dressed as a black character, and to be so, I don't know, it felt brazen to me, how dare you be out there like that. So I wanted to go up and introduce myself to this person and really see how they felt, because it's one thing to say you don't see a problem in it when you're surrounded by other people who don't see a problem in it. It's another thing to say when you're literally standing next to a black person that you don't see anything here that could possibly be slightly questionable. But yeah, the person I was with told me not to go because I would be making a scene. And I was like, he's making a scene. He woke up this morning and dressed like a black character. If I was to live here and have kids here, I think I'd be really concerned about how they were to feel at this point of the year every time, because I think kids are cruel as it is, and I'm pretty sure that these little black kids get called Zwarte Piet. Also, I have educated colleagues at work who see they really don't see anything wrong with it, and it's so uncomfortable to you wouldn't even want to have that conversation.
I joined Luce, another student from the Netherlands, in this interview with Katrina. And when I first heard about it, I was completely shocked. I'd never heard about it before, and I was just surprised that something so clearly politically incorrect would be still happening in 2020 and still, accepted. So what did you guys think when you saw it?
Well, I've known about this tradition for a while, and like many Black people, I relate to Katrina's feelings regarding this racist tradition, because that's what it is. It's not something that should be praised or just be, seen blanked over as something that is just traditional and that should stay. It's a racist tradition that needs to end. And I think that it really does suck for many young Black kids growing up and having to deal with seeing that every year. I don't know what it would be like to live in a country where that is so normalized.
Racism can not only be pervasive in traditions, but also in our institutions. Shifting gears here, we're going to discuss calls from Black Lives Matter groups to defund the police.
One of the big issues is defining what defunding the police actually means. Without a clear understanding of the objectives, this movement can risk losing support and causing fights over semantics.
Haluk Mukhtarji served as the chair of Toronto Police Service Board for 10 years. He's now a strong advocate for defunding the police. He plays a lead role in shaping the national conversation about policing, and he has written his own book. Let's hear what Haluk has to say.
People who are experiencing health issues, who are having, for example, crisis due to mental health, they should not lose their life in the context of or in the course of a quote unquote wellness check. Why would you send a highly paid armed police officer? They could have been dealt with by a mental health nurse, by a social worker, by a paramedic. I believe that only a very small percentage of those cases perhaps need the presence of an armed resource. So again, it goes back to the same point about improper use of resources that are producing tragic outcomes.
There are longer versions of many of our interviews, just like the one we heard on our website.
While cities around the world struggle with the idea of defunding the police, there are many police departments that are already working hard at race relations within their communities.
Sgt Keith Richards is a Black police officer in a suburban area outside of Toronto. He was raised to be afraid of the police. Realizing how much the police needed to change, Keith was inspired to become a part of the change himself when he was a young man.
Keith now works as a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer at a regional police department. Ryerson student Sarah Lefebvre produced this story.
If we're having a discussion around Black Lives Matter, and you have an organization like the police where every officer was white, whose perspective would you rely on to have a wholesome conversation about Black Lives Matter? If you have no Black officers in your organization that you can say, hey, can we sit down and have a conversation about the situation? I'm trying to learn what the community experience is. Well, if you don't have that mosaic within your organization, who are you relying upon in order to give you that information? So it becomes very important that you have a diverse workforce so that when you're having those conversations about different situations that come up in policing, you can rely upon your members to then give you information. I grew up afraid of the police. My parents grew up during the civil rights movement. So my parents' perception was that the police were an extension of oppressive government. So they would see the videos like Martin Luther King and his peaceful marches, and they would see police and the canines and all that kind of stuff that you see in the videos. And that's how they use that to frame their perception of police. My mom would always say, if you see the police, you run. Right? So there's just this inherent fear that if I was engaged in the police in any capacity, that it can only be a negative experience for me. Ironically, there were 3 officers in the Pickering station that used to stop me all the time as a kid. And they would just stop me just to say hi, just talk to me. And that followed me for a long time, and I kept thinking, I want to do what they did, because they changed my perception. Public trust is huge, and in order for the public to have confidence in the work that we're doing, we have to make sure that it's all inclusive. And so the importance of it was that, one, it allowed me to do some training with our members, And it's kind of twofold. So one was to allow us to have training, me to have training for our members, so that they were, one, treating each other with respect in the workplace, but that they were also transferring that respect to members of the public. My example is that you cannot wait till crisis to then start getting to know one another. You cannot wait till crisis to start building a relationship, right? So all hell's breaking loose, and this is what's happening with the police and the community members. That's not the good time to build the relationship. What we should be doing is building relationships from the start when there isn't an issue. Because then, one, it also feels like it's more genuine. And especially to see the current climate where there's a lot of anti-police sentiment going around, or anti-establishment sentiment, or anti-government sentiment, is for my office and for what we do, I've already built those relationships years ago. I can call pretty much any demographic, any community member, any faith base within Durham region, and they all know me on a first name basis because I didn't wait till crisis to develop those relationships. We can't just go into people's lives and expect the same outcome if we do the same thing. The reality is you can do the same thing and still have a different reaction from people. You know, we'll have a lot of officers that'll say, you know what, Keith, I don't see color. And I'll say, well, that's unfortunate, because what you're trying to say is not that I don't see color. What you're trying to say is that I see your color, but it is not relevant to me or relevant to my relationship with you. Depending on who you say that to, they might actually be offended by that. Because if you say you don't see color, you're actually saying, I don't see you. You first have to be aware of what your biases are. And that's usually the hardest part of the training, is being able to get people to suss out what their biases are. Because everybody has bias, but there may be different. It might depend on what your parents' views are. It might depend where you grew up. It might depend what your friend network is, or what media that you're exposed to online. Looking at my perfect police force is saying, hey, every one of that 900 that wear this uniform need to make contributions and efforts to develop those relationships with the community before there's crisis. That would be a perfect world for me.
You're watching Let's Talk Racism. Our next story takes place in India, where racial discrimination is deeply embedded in society. Some forms of racism are against people who were born and raised in India. It's known as regional racism.
The following film looks at the regional racism against the Bihari migrants, who are commonly known as Biharis. They have always faced discrimination, but it's become even more noticeable during the coronavirus pandemic.
पूरा कंप्लीट लॉकडाउन है, कहीं से कोई सवारी आपको नहीं मिल रही है, तो यहाँ भीड़ ना लगाइए, धारा 144 भी लगी हुई है, और बीमारी को फैलने से बचाइए। ये बीमारी सांस रहने से, छुआछूत से फैल रही है। कम से कम 1 मीटर की दूरी बनाकर चलिए आपस में।
Migrant workers have been made to squat in the middle of the road as they are sprayed with disinfectants by health workers.
Left in the lurch, hungry migrants jumped when they saw a person carrying food.
Majority of these people were Biharis. Biharis are people belonging from the eastern Indian state of Bihar who migrate to other cities for a livelihood due to the slower economic growth than the rest of India in the 1990s.
आपका नाम?
सहिंदर कुमार।
कहाँ से आप?
बिहार से।
आप दिल्ली आए क्यों थे?
दिल्ली कमाने के लिए आए।
Majority of Bihari migrants do menial jobs in the cities, living off in poor conditions.
यहाँ पैसा के लिए तो आना ही पड़ता है हर व्यक्ति के लिए।
But there is a certain hate that people of other states have towards these people. The anti-Bihari sentiment. It's been a long-term mindset of people that all Biharis are illiterate, corrupt, lawbreakers who do not know how to behave and should be thrown back to their state. Discrimination against Biharis is so deeply rooted that irrespective of whatever they do, from a rickshaw puller to a technocrat, their image remains the same. Racism against Biharis has always existed, but so normalized that no one really batted an eye, until the plight of Bihari migrants was seen in the corona pandemic.
और पुलिस वाले भी परेशान कर रहे हैं, मार रहे हैं, तोड़ रहे हैं, भगा रहे हैं। ऐसे कि हम इंसानी, हम कोई जानवर हैं जो हमें भगा रहे हैं।
यहाँ पे काम धंधा था, मजदूरी है, काम धंधा कर लेते, रोज बच्चों को खिला लेते। अब यहाँ पे 2 महीने से कौन दे रहा है हमारे लिए? वो कोई नहीं दे रहा है। घर में कह देते हैं सरकार दे रही, वो दे रहा है, कोई नहीं दे रहा है बच्चों के लिए।
The NRIs were brought back to the country with utmost importance and care. But since no proper transportation was arranged for these people, they struggled.
कहता घर जाने के लिए भी कहता 2500 रुपया टिकट, 2500 रुपया। अब मियाँ बीवी में 5000 रुपया हम कहाँ से लाएंगे?
15-year-old Jyoti Kumari had cycled her way all the way from Gurugram to her hometown of Darbhanga in Bihar with her ailing father, covering a distance of 1200 kilometers over a span of 7 days.
This neglection by the government created a chaos, and as a result, thousands of migrants ended up returning to their homes on feet.
Watching that is kind of overwhelming and rather disgusting, actually, because it's such an overt act of racism and, frankly, a violation of human rights. What did you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. Disgusting and overwhelming pretty much sums it up.
It's a different example from what we just saw in India, but there are some people who have been in Hong Kong for generations but not recognized as Hong Kongers. In some cases, people even use offensive words to describe them. Some said they are rejected by taxi drivers if they are wearing their traditional clothes.
We've talked a lot in this show about various aspects of systemic racism against Black people and other ethnicities from around the world. We're going to leave you today by hearing from 4 young women who are trying to make a difference in their own ways.
First, you'll hear from 2 women from the Netherlands, Heya Yakubi, a former youth representative for human rights and security at the United Nations. She talked with the world leaders about climate change, security, and racism, and given multiple speeches at the UN in New York.
Laverne, the youth representative who gets to talk about important topics and gets to voice them to the European Union.
I see a lot of polarization when it comes to the political opposite sides of the spectrum. I see a lot of phobias towards religious people, and I see a lot happening also on the basis of ethnic backgrounds. Our identity in itself is already really complex, you know, as a human being. There are so many layers to that identity. But you see what often happens when we talk about generalization, when we talk about racism and discrimination, is that that entire complex identity, that people actually take one aspect out of it and only judge and see you on the basis of that. Social media nowadays, with the algorithms, they show you more of the content that you're already viewing. So when I encounter somebody that doesn't agree with me, whether that's online or in the real world, my reaction to them can be very aggressive and very misunderstanding. I'm not able to understand anymore that there's anybody who could not see things the way that they are in my reality. The dangerous thing with that is that we can lose our ability to empathize with people, and if we lose our ability to empathize with people, then our fear and aversion towards people only grows larger. I don't think that social media is the cause for the problem for polarization and for discrimination, but I think it's the way that we use it that forms the problem. Because I also think that social media can be like this solution. It's really as simple as people getting back in touch with each other. And if we want to tackle discrimination, then first things first, people need to actively and consciously acknowledge the fact that our identities are so layered as human beings that we cannot narrow people down to one simple aspect.
There is a movement going on, really strong, and especially with young people. So young people are really aware, and well, especially what happened with the situation in the USA. Also in the Netherlands, that was really a big thing, and everyone was shocked. And what I noticed personally, so far as I could see, was young people really stepping up and reading reading books about racism, listening to podcasts, talking with each other about racism. What is racism, and how does it evolve, and how does it work, and how can we stop it also? So the discussion is coming, and I think that's an important thing, because that's really step one of the solution.
Maureen is a fourth-year journalism student in the Netherlands who has her own YouTube channel where she invites guests to talk about topics they are passionate about. She loves to give others a voice.
I spoke with
with youth who are interested in politics. I spoke with youth who sing in church. I spoke with youth who have a charity going on, and they also help other people. And on that platform, I really want to let those stories be heard. I want people to be inspired by it, to realize that the dreams that they have, that they are not that big, or well, they are not too big to achieve them, and that they are not that it is not impossible to achieve your dream.
At the beginning of the show, we met Zoe, a young Black woman who lives near Toronto. She attended her first protest in the summer after the police officer killed George Floyd in the United States. She said getting involved made her think about her role as a Black woman and made her reflect on what she needs to do to make a change.
There's just a lot of microaggression. I feel like that's the type of racism that I kind of endure, and what most people that I know do. It's not anything that's like obvious, but it's just little things that you're not aware of that you say, and you're like, probably shouldn't say that. That's not smart, but that's actually really offensive to a lot of people. So I feel like just kind of those things, microaggression in general, just what are words that are non-inclusive, and kind of educate yourself on those things. So I feel like that's the best thing you can do. Just be aware of it. I had to educate myself on what it was, and also just telling others when I feel uneasy, because I feel like that's the biggest part of this too, is a lot of us, people of color, Black people, we got used to hearing those things. So it became normal. So I feel like for us to just actually start standing up for ourselves and actually being like, listen, that actually kind of hurt me. That was offensive. I did not enjoy that. That's actually rude. So I feel like just things like that, because I've heard things, growing up, like, oh, like, you're so white for a Black person. Like, I never thought that was something that's just, not really nice. I was like, haha, like white family, like, yeah, facts. But like, no, it's actually rude. Like, I got so used to hearing it that I was like, yeah, I am that white Black person. Like, that's me. But then it's like, but I'm not white. I get what you mean. And I get that my personality may come off that way because that's how I was raised. But I myself am not a white person. Like, I don't identify as a white person.
We're joined again by Sammy and Julisse in Fresno, California, and Sine and Tracy from Johannesburg, South Africa. We're ending the show by talking about what it takes to make change.
Let's go around the virtual room and hear your thoughts. Personally, I think that what we're doing right here, just spending a semester focusing on issues about systemic racism and producing these shows, is a form of activism in itself.
Yeah, I think it's crazy that it's even a discussion that we're having in 2020 still, but it needs to be talked about and it needs to be discussed like how we're discussing it now. It's just raising awareness and just helping out where we can and supporting people that are victims of systemic racism. I think it's very important.
I think racism is an important topic that must be addressed, especially the different kinds of racism. The fact that these young women are being physically involved in awareness, I really believe that's very impressive. If young people stand up against racism, chances are the future generation will be more aware of it and more initiatives against it will rise. And hopefully we'll see more of those in the future, and there'll be less cases as well.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is education, educating other people on our experiences as Black women, as Black people. It's important that people understand what we go through for them to be able to actually be our allies and help us move forward. So I think the main thing that we can do is just educate people on how they can help us.
So I think as women, they had courage to speak out against racism. It's admirable, and we all need to be brave to fight for our rights when facing injustice or discrimination.
Yeah, at this stage, what we need to do is not only about the law, it's more about the way they are portrayed by others, they are treated by others. Yes.
I think that racism is a really hard and uncomfortable topic for a lot of people to talk about, but these conversations need to be held, and they should be held more often, and they should be educational and professional, just as we did here and how we told these stories and shared these incidents. These are the lives that many people around the world live on a daily basis, and the hardships that they face should be discussed.
Yeah, just to echo what Tracy said, I think that education is really at the crux of this, and starting with the education in schools and the curriculum, incorporating Black history, incorporating units on social injustices, I think that really is going to make a difference in generations to come.
I'm so thankful for platforms like this and outlets like this where we can empower each other through conversation and through stories and through journalism. Like you all mentioned, these are so important, and the conversations need to continue to happen so change can continue to happen.
Thank you for watching this episode of Let's Talk Racism. It was produced by students at 7 universities around the world.
You can watch this and all of our episodes on Facebook and YouTube, and even see more content on our website.
Thank you for watching. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.